Alright guys, hello and welcome to 9.4. We'll work a few problems for you today. I've got several actually from this section. First of all, we're going to solve for V in this problem. We're going to solve for V, which means that we are going to eliminate from that side everything else. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get V out of the denominator. So I'm going to multiply by V squared on both sides. Now this will cancel and I'll have V squared times W. So WV squared equals K times F times R. Now I'm getting closer. I want to isolate the V, so I'm going to divide by W. So V squared is equal to KFR over W. Now to isolate V, I need to take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of each side. Remember, when you take a square root that you actually get plus or minus the square root of V equals plus or minus the square root. I'm going to split this in parts, KFR over the square root of W. You could leave it all together. You can split it apart. I'm going to split it apart because I want this to be in the right form. And the right form doesn't have a W in the denominator. So to fix that, I got to multiply by the square root of W over the square root of W. When I do that, this is plus or minus the square root of KFRW. And the denominator, we release that square root, we're not there anymore, is equal to W. So V is equal to plus or minus the square root of KFRW over W. Okay, next example. Example B. We want to solve for A this time. So we're going to have to square both sides. So I'm going to square this side and square this side. So I get D squared equals 4A over PT. Now I want to get PT removed from the bottom of the fraction. I'm going to multiply both sides by PT. So I have PT D squared equals 4A. Now all I have to do is divide by 4. So my final answer here is D squared times P times T over 4 equals A. Next example, we want to solve for P in this problem. We'll solve for P, and looks like the Pythagorean theorem. We have a right triangle. To solve for P, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate the P squared term. So I'm going to subtract Q squared from each side. It now says P squared equals R squared minus Q squared. Now I will isolate the P by taking the square root. So P is equal to the square root of R squared minus Q squared. Since P is a length of measure on a triangle, it's going to be positive, so I don't have to put the plus minus in front of the square root symbol. Next, F equals kg over r squared. I want us to solve for r, so first we have to remove it from the denominator, so we're going to multiply both sides by r squared. So F r squared equals kg, divide by F. R squared equals kg over F. And the next thing I need to do is take the square root. Now I don't know, I don't have a picture. These are measurements, and so they probably can have positive and negative values. So R is equal to plus or minus the square root of kg over the square root of F. But I don't want to leave the square root of F in the denominator. Same thing as did a while ago. So I'm going to rationalize the denominator. So final answer here is the square root of kgf over F. Okay, rectangle has dimensions the length is 2 meters less than twice the width. Here's my original picture right here. When 3 meters are added to the width, the result is a square with an area of 64. So this is my square. Its area, which means if you multiply the length times the width, it's equal to 64. So it sets us up for a quadratic equation, and what we need to do is we need to move the 64 over, we need to FOIL out the left side, and then we need to refactor or use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to use FOIL here, and I'm going to have 2x squared plus 6x minus 2x minus 6 equals 64. I'm going to move the 64 over, clean up this side, so it's going to say 2x squared plus 4x minus 70 is equal to 0. Now I notice that 2, 4, and 70 are even. My life's going to be a lot easier if I can reduce those numbers down, so I can factor a 2 out of that. And it'll say x squared plus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Now I can divide both sides by 2, get rid of that. So x squared plus 2x minus 35 equals 0. I'm ready to factor. And the factors are x plus 7 and x minus 5. So I'll set those equal to 0. X can be negative 7 or x can be 5. Now, which of these can be an actual measurement of the side of a square? Not negative 7. So x is 5. So I'm going to take that back up to my picture. X is 5. 2 times 5 minus 2, that's 10 minus 2, that's 8. So the question said to find the dimensions of the rectangle, and that's going to be 5 meters by 8 meters. Next example, it's about a rectangle. It says a rectangular piece of metal is 10 inches longer than it is wide. So here it is right here, I've drawn it out. Squares with 2-inch sides are cut from each corner. So here's the next picture. We're going to cut a square from each corner. The squares are 2 by 2. So you're actually, from this being 10, you're going to take off 2 from each end, so it's now x minus 4. And this was x plus 10, but we're taking 2 from each end, so it's going to be x plus 10 minus 4. Now you're going to fold along those dotted lines, and you're going to create like the top of a shoebox. And the volume, when you do that, is 918 inches cubed. Well, to find the volume, you need to multiply the length times the width times the height. Well, the length is x plus 10 minus 4, that's x plus 6. The width is x minus 4, and the height is 2. So that's going to equal 918 when I multiply it together. So I'm going to get rid of the 2 to begin with. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And that's going to take that number down to 459 equals x plus 6 times x minus 4. I'm going to FOIL this side out. That's x squared minus 4x plus 6x minus 24 equals 459. Then I'm going to subtract 459 from each side. X squared plus 2x minus, let's see, that's going to be 483 is equal to 0. You can factor this or use the quadratic formula. This is going to factor into x plus 23 and x minus 21. When you solve, you're going to get x is equal to negative 23 or x is equal to 21. Once again, these are real dimensions, so we're going to have to go with the one that's positive. So this is going to be 21, and this side's going to be 31, and these are in inches. So that's that example. A ball is thrown vertically from the ground. The distance from the ground in t seconds is given by this formula. After how many seconds will it be 128 feet from the ground? Well, you're going to plug that 128 in place of D. So it's going to say 128 equals negative 16t squared plus 96t. And then we're going to move everything over. I like to start with a positive coefficient on my square term, so I'm going to move everything over to the left side. So this says 16t squared minus 96t plus 128 equals 0. We can factor a 16 out of all of those, and it drops it to t squared minus 6t plus 8 equals 0. You can divide both sides by 16. Then you're down to t squared minus 6t plus 8 equals 0. And we can factor. And that'll give me t minus 4 and t minus 2. So t4 and t2. Well, here's what happens. You throw the ball from the ground, it goes up, and then it starts back down. So if this is 128, it's going to occur 2 times. It's going to occur 2 seconds, and again at 4 seconds. So this has 2 answers, 2 seconds and 4 seconds.